I mean, parents feel desperate. They don't know how to help their children. And gosh, if it was as simple as avoiding a food, I mean, we probably wouldn't even be here having this conversation. But unfortunately, restrictive diets don't work.
Hi, skin friend. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of The Skin Reel. This week, I am doing a first ever. I am bringing back my friend, my colleague, Dr. Sheilagh Maguiness, to discuss pediatric skincare myths. So a couple months ago, I did some podcast episodes on skincare myths that I see most commonly in adults. And believe it or not, there are tons of myths that are just pervasive about baby skincare, child skincare, teens and tweens. And so Dr. Maguiness is here to bust some of those. And I'm so glad to have her back. She actually was one of my very first guests when I started the podcast. And if you're interested in hearing another episode with Dr. Maguiness, you can check out the podcast episode, Optimizing the Care of Your Baby's Skin, which originally aired December 6, 2022. So Dr. Sheilagh Maguiness, she is a double board certified pediatric dermatologist. She practices at the University of Minnesota. She is also president of the Society for Pediatric Dermatology. And when she is not taking care of pediatric patients in her busy clinic, she is also the mom to 2 tween boys and founder and co-founder of Stryke Club, which is a personal care and hygiene brand for boys, because it seems like these guys, these young men are kind of getting left out in the skincare craze and industry, and they need to have good products to take care of their skin as well. Dr. Sheilagh loves to educate the public on all things related to skincare, babies, kids, and teens, and she has a huge following on social media, on TikTok and Instagram, so be sure to check her out on that as well for tons of great education on pediatric skincare. Today, we are going to be busting some of the top pediatric skincare myths that are around. I was going to do 5, but actually threw in a little extra for you. So it's actually going to be 6 skincare myths for babies and children that Dr. Maguiness is going to help us better understand, so that we can actually know how to take care of our little one's skin. Be sure to stick around. Dr. Maguiness, it's so much fun having you back. You were one of my very first guests on the Skin Reel podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed seeing how your podcast is taking off and all the wonderful guests and education you've been able to provide for people. So it's awesome.
Oh, well, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, you were one of the first ones before we even did video. So it's always fun. I think it's more fun to connect over video. So I'm glad we can do that. And for those, I didn't think people actually watch podcasts, but evidently they do.
That's good. Yeah, I think the video is really great.
So I have been doing a bunch of podcast episodes about skincare myths, mostly for adults. I feel like I could almost run this whole podcast debunking skincare and dermatology myths. And there's so much in the pediatric realm. And I thought, who better to have on than you as a pediatric dermatologist to bust some of these common myths that I hear all the time from not just patients, my friends, family members, right?
Totally. There are so many myths. And I think that you and I came up with 5 that we kind of want to cover today in this podcast.
That's right. We'll limit it to 5 so we can really actually delve into these. So let's just jump right in. And this is a myth I hear a lot with my friends who have children with eczema or really sensitive skin, and that it is that you should not bathe your newborn or someone with sensitive skin very often because it could dry their skin out. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. But this idea about limiting bathing has really persisted for so many years, Dr. Mina. And I think if you look at the data, it even kind of is born out of specialty-specific recommendations. So I'll have all these new moms in clinic who say, Dr. Maguiness, my pediatrician told me not to bathe my baby more than once or twice a week. And then I look at what, we as pediatric derms, dermatologists, allergists, subspecialists who care for children with sensitive skin recommend, and that is for frequent bathing, for daily bathing. So what's right? And where does this all come from?
Yes, I'm already confused.
I know, right? By the time the parents get to me, they've heard so many things, and who can blame them for being confused? So it turns out the way you bathe your baby is really important. And so is the frequency. So it's both things. I think back in the 80s and 90s, when people were using baby cleansers that were a little harsher, ones that were filled with those really, really foamy surfactants, and they would bubble up. And you can probably remember the commercials with the babies and the bubbles everywhere. But those type of really harsh detergents filled with fragrance and potential irritants, if you bathe your baby with a cleanser like that every day, get them out of the bath, and then don't apply a moisturizer, that is a sure way to dry your baby's skin out, because you're going to have water evaporating from the surface and you've just stripped off all of the natural oils and protection. So when you look at the data, and there have been some really nice studies done about frequency of bathing, it turns out that really for newborns with super sensitive skin and for children who are prone to eczema or atopic dermatitis, frequent bathing and even limiting the soap, not using any soap or using a very, very mild liquid detergent cleanser, like a synthetic detergent, not with a harsh foamy surfactant, but something really gentle, or no soap at all. And then you get your baby or child out of the bath, and immediately within, a minute, apply a bland, really thick, hypoallergenic moisturizer head to toe. That has been termed the soak and smear method. And truly, that is a great way to gently repair a sensitive skin barrier after having added water to it in the bath. So I like to kind of use the example of, think of your hands in the bathtub. They get really wrinkly and pruny, right? That's because water is getting into the stratum corneum and expanding it. And so then you want to keep it there, because a lot of times that dryness is caused by too much water leaving the surface of the skin. So if we can trap the water in by that soak and seal, that really has the most evidence for the best type of bathing to do for your newborn and for children with sensitive skin prone to eczema. So it's frequent bathing, but you have to seal it in.
You just helped explain that and so beautifully, in such an easy way to remember. And I love that about the pruning of your fingers. Yes, because your fingers have absorbed too much moisture, and you actually want that for your little ones or people with sensitive skin. So go ahead and lock in that moisturizer, or lock in that hydration with a thick, bland emollient. That's great advice.
Yeah, because then the pH can kind of balance out underneath there. So it's very soothing to the skin barrier to do that.
And what about the temperature of the water?
Just lukewarm. You don't want it super cold, and you definitely don't want it super hot, especially for our littles. We want it to be just lukewarm. And really, a tub bath is like an immersion tub bath where you're soaking is, I think, and studies I think would also support this, better for the skin than a shower. Because in the shower, the water's kind of sprinkling off of you and you're not getting that same soaked effect. I mean, your hands are less likely to get pruny in a shower as opposed to the bath. So for children, especially infants and young children and those prone to eczema, we do recommend a soaking immersion tub bath. And I think that's really important to talk about with parents, because bathing practices vary widely depending on what you've been told or what you've done in your own household or even culturally. But I like that idea of a soaking tub bath and then that moisture layer right on top.
That was one of my favorite parts of having a little one, is every night that was like our routine, get in the bathtub and just kind of play. And it was great bonding experience. So I love that people shouldn't be afraid to have that with their newborn or their child just because they have sensitive skin.
Exactly. We don't want people to be afraid to bathe their newborn. What could be better than the newborn bath and massaging a moisturizer? You're right. It really does, I think, strengthen the bonding. So that's really important. And I think it also really helps to go a long way towards improving the skin barrier so that your child is less likely to develop things like cradle cap, the dreaded cradle cap, the seborrhea, when dead skin and microbes kind of build up on the scalp and parents are not washing the scalp really very, very much or very well, or behind the ears. And so it's a good opportunity to remove dirt and debris in a soaking tub bath.
I maybe told this story before, but my poor son, he was my first one, and I wasn't washing behind his ears well enough. And then one day I looked back there, I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So I needed to do a little more of the soaking for sure.
It's a common pitfall for parents. The milk and saliva and drool just kind of get into the neck and all skin folds, and we need to wash that out, or it can be a harbor ground for bacteria.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the water too, beyond just hydrating the skin, is also washing off bacteria that are in dead skin cells, and all of that needs to come off as well. So do not be afraid to wash your newborn. And I love how you gave some really great specific advice on how to actually go about doing that. So that is great. All right, now myth number 2. And I just had a friend talk to me about this. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to have Dr. Maguiness spill the tea on this. Myth number 2, eczema is caused by a food allergy. True or false?
False. But this is a myth that I would really like for us to try to address, because I think it's a confusing topic.
Yeah.
The reason it's so confusing, Dr. Mina, is that children with eczema or atopic dermatitis are more prone to food allergies. So parents are often confused or counseled incorrectly that a food, when ingested, can flare up eczema on the skin. And that really almost never happens. It's a very small minority of cases of eczema that really do truly get made worse by a food. In fact, I want to share with our listeners today that the opposite is true. So to understand this concept, you kind of have to go back to what is eczema. And so we now have more knowledge about this than we ever did before. And what we know is that eczema or atopic dermatitis is a disorder of the skin barrier. It turns out that children and adults with atopic dermatitis are missing or deficient in a little protein that's supposed to drag water and hold water into the skin. So going back to the bathing discussion, this is kind of, the truth about eczema is that when the children cannot hold water into their skin, they're losing too much through the surface. And then their skin barrier becomes dry and desiccated and very prone to things like bacteria and allergens sticking to the skin. And those things then present themselves to your immune system, a little baby's developing immune system through the skin. And that process is called epicutaneous sensitization. I'll use this example. This is how I try to explain it in my clinic when patients are asking me about food allergies and eczema. Say you have a baby, they're showing signs of atopic dermatitis. Maybe they had cradle cap and now they've got red patches, cheeks, outer arms, and their skin barrier is really not intact. And you're the mom and you have just hastily prepared yourself a peanut butter sandwich because you're in a rush and you've forgotten to eat and, you're a new mom. There's lots to do. So you have peanut protein from the peanut butter on your hand and then you pick up your infant. So now how is that peanut being shown to your newborn's developing immune system? They're being shown that peanut protein through the skin. And it turns out that's not the healthy way to teach your body how to tolerate these highly allergenic foods. Really, it's the early introduction of foods by the mouth in the gut that teach our immune system how to tolerate them. When you see an allergenic protein on the skin, your immune system's more likely to say, oh, that doesn't look right, and start to develop a hypersensitivity to it. So, in terms of chicken and egg, we have figured out this riddle. It really is the skin barrier defect that makes children and those with eczema more prone to developing food allergies over time. But a food doesn't cause the dermatitis or the eczema coming out on the skin. I think that's a tough concept, but hopefully that illustrates a good example for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never thought of it quite like that, but I love how you put that. And yeah, I will hear people say all the time, it's just so ingrained in us that food can cause eczema. And I love that you are just here to squash that no, it is a problem with the skin barrier. And I find that I meet families where they are stripping gluten out of everyone or the child's diet, or they're eliminating milk or very specific or broad food categories for the child, which that has negative complications. They may not be getting all the nutrients that they need. And all the calories that they need. And so it's so important to realize that the food is not causing your child's eczema. And if you are struggling, make sure you can see, if not a pediatric dermatologist, at least a dermatologist, right, for some really good advice and care.
I'm glad you brought attention to that, because severe restrictive diets, I think, have been done to try and find, parents feel desperate. They don't know how to help their children. And gosh, if it was as simple as avoiding a food, we probably wouldn't even be here having this conversation. But unfortunately, restrictive diets don't work. And it's important for listeners to kind of understand, what does a food allergy really look like in a child? It's not something where you see a rash on the skin getting worse. It's actually hives. It's a different arm of your immune system that's being activated because your child was sensitized to the food. So they eat the food now that they're allergic to. Say they have a peanut exposure, and then within an hour, the child may feel unwell. There might be vomiting, there might be diarrhea, and you might start to see hives on the skin. And hives are different from eczema. Hives are those circular welts that come and go. They look very edematous. They respond to antihistamines. But that is usually the sign of a true type 1 food hypersensitivity allergy.
That's a great point, that it really doesn't cause the rash that you see with eczema, which is from your skin barrier being damaged. But it can be so confusing and so hard to differentiate, and even, I think, hard for like we were saying before, the pediatricians and other doctors don't necessarily know this distinction with eczema either. So it can be really confusing for everyone.
It is. And as you know, these guidelines have changed so rapidly in the last 15 years that I think it's very hard. Pediatricians have a tough job. It's hard for them to keep on top of every new thing. But, the American Academy of Pediatrics did open up their food introduction guidelines to be 4 months and up, because it turns out that early food exposure is how you teach that baby's immune system to tolerate the food. And the babies that get the food by mouth early on are less likely to develop food allergies, because they're less likely to then get that epicutaneous sensitization. If they've already had it in the gut, they're like, okay, we know what this is, we're good. And they don't end up with an allergy. So those are really changing guidelines. And yeah, it is tough to keep up with all of the latest recommendations.
For sure. My kids are now 9 and 10, and I have a hard time even remembering that far back.
Me too.
It's so interesting how I do remember peanuts. I forget if it was a year or what that they were introduced.
2. I think it was 2. And in doing that, we restricted food introduction of peanut for a long time in this country. And in doing so, we probably made more peanut allergic children. So really, that early food introduction is really important. Talk to your pediatrician about it if you've got a newborn at home and you're thinking about it, because it really is a good way to prevent food allergy.
Great advice there. All right, well, let's move on to number 3. Okay. Products marked or advertised as for baby are always better than the other options on the shelf. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. Gosh, I wish this one was fact, right? But what I want listeners to know and take away from this conversation today, Dr. Mina, is that the health, wellness, and beauty industry, so that's like a huge category of over-the-counter products that you go into the big retailers and you see the whole baby aisle, etc., it is completely unregulated. So all of the claims, all of the things that you see marketed, for baby, for sensitive skin, you really do have to take it all with a large grain of salt.
Yeah, like a pinch of salt.
A pinch. A lot of it is really just marketing. I think you and I would both agree that if dermatologists were allowed to redefine the standard of what people are calling clean beauty, now that's another term we can talk about for ages, right? Because what does that even mean? It really is kind of a made-up marketing term as well. People want to trend towards products that seem, made for sensitive skin, gentle. People will throw around, is it a chemical? Well, everything's a chemical. Or is it toxic, et cetera. And there's a lot of fear mongering about it. But at the same time, we do have to realize that all of these claims are just marketing. And so there are a few rules of thumb that I counsel my patients about when you're looking for products for babies. And I'm sure that you do the same. And that is, there are a couple of things that are the most important when you're looking at what you want to apply to your baby's skin. Number one is that the product is fragrance and essential oil free. Believe it or not, fragrance and essential oils are such a huge cause of irritant and allergic contact dermatitis. And our baby's skin is just, it's so cute and pudgy and sweet, but it's actually thinner than ours. And so it gets a bit more presented to it through the skin, and it has the potential to absorb ingredients and become more irritated from certain ingredients that we apply. So a cleanser, a moisturizer, what you're putting on your baby does matter. And I would say stick to fragrance-free, essential oil-free, gentle preparations. You can look for the word hypoallergenic. Even though that's not a so-called regulated term, it does mean the product has gone through additional testing to make sure that it doesn't cause a rash in the majority of users who were tested with the product. So hypoallergenic is a great thing to look for too. And I think that's the best you can do. Fragrance-free, essential oil-free, hypoallergenic. Stick to those types of products, and you'll probably eliminate quite a few of the ones that could have been potential for irritation or allergy.
Yeah, I love just watching your Instagram reels where you will show these products that say baby on it. They're marketed clearly for parents to buy for their babies, and then you'll turn it around and say like, "Oh my gosh, this says unscented, but there are really fragrances in here to make it."
There really are.
Yeah, can you just explain the difference between fragrance-free and unscented?
Yes, I would love to. So fragrance-free is a term that really manufacturers have to make sure there is no fragrance in the product. But unscented means that they can use like masking fragrance or like fragrances to try to cover up whatever smell that the product may have had. So unscented is not the same as fragrance-free. You should always look for fragrance-free because yes, it might say lightly scented or unscented, and that does mean it still has fragrance in it.
This is advice that I use for myself and for adults that really stick with fragrance-free stuff. And some people I know really love to smell, and they love the products that smell good. And if you don't have sensitive skin, then fine, enjoy, go for it. But I'll tell you, I don't really have sensitive skin, but I was using this soap at a really nice hotel. It smelled amazing, and it gave me the worst eyelid dermatitis because something in that product, that fragrance really affected my skin. So you just never know when it's going to happen, and it's not fun. I just, and myself, really just stick with fragrance free and let my, if I wear perfume, let that be the fragrance if I'm going to do that. So I think great advice, no matter how old you are, but especially for the little ones.
Yes, I totally agree. And I'm not a fragrance hater. A lot of people will look at at the education things that I put out. I love how a fragrance can evoke a memory and it can really elevate an experience, right? But we're not meant to be rubbing lavender extract on our babies.
Yeah.
When you really break it down and think of it like that, I hope it makes sense to people because a lavender essential oil is one of the highest rising contact allergies in children under 5. Did you know that?
Wow.
And it makes sense because
it's in everything. And now I do love lavender. Yes, I'm like you. I love lavender, but I don't necessarily need to smear it all over myself or my little one. And I think babies smell delicious the way they are.
Exactly. They do.
Another thing I didn't realize until, I guess, when I was a dermatologist is I used to think, oh, I have to buy baby sunscreen for my little ones. And then I realized, I just looked at the actual ingredients and I realized baby sunscreen in general is mineral-based sunscreens like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, those physical sunscreens. So you don't have to buy a baby sunscreen to put on your child. You just need to stick with those ingredients, zinc and titanium, and then you can use it safely on your child. So sometimes I feel like they just try to trick you, and I don't know if there's a price difference or what.
There probably is. There's a baby Aquaphor and an Aquaphor, and they're exactly the same, but they cost a little bit different in some stores. So you're right. that marketing component is strong, and moms want to do anything they can to like protect their baby, buy what's right for baby. So I think they're just kind of using that vulnerability in the marketing to try to get you to part with your money. But you're absolutely right. It's not the marketing. It's not that it says it's for babies. It's the ingredients that matter.
So yeah, don't be afraid to flip it around and actually look at that a little more closely. All right, let's go to number 4. Kids don't really need to use sunscreen. Fact or fiction?
Fiction, fiction. Kids need sunscreen. And you know what's great is as moms, doctors, caregivers, we can do a really good job instilling those good habits for sun protection early on, right? So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that babies as young as 6 months can use a sunscreen applied to their skin. But, you know, you and I know that sun protection is much more than just applying a sunscreen, right? It's in those really early days when you have a newborn, using the shade, protective clothing, hats, all of that, really important. Keeping your baby out of direct sunlight, especially at high UV index hours, from 11 to 4, usually the UV index is highest. And then when you need to protect exposed areas, just like you indicated, Dr. Mina, we prefer the mineral-based sunscreens, just those physical blockers that help to reflect the UV and that are less likely to cause allergic reactions, that are less likely to be absorbed through the skin. So I really like in those early years, the mineral zinc sticks where you can just kind of paint it on the baby. Then it's not a liquid. It doesn't get in the eyes and irritate. I've seen a lot of great social media posts for moms using makeup blenders and brushes and things to get like a liquid sunscreen on their baby. I think those are great ways to do it. But then, of course, you also have to reapply every couple of hours or when sweating or swimming. But definitely you need to protect your babies from the harmful effects of the sun. And that translates into toddler years and mid-childhood. And even when kids are trying to get a little more independent, they should still be hopefully agreeable to wearing a hat and protective clothing and putting their sunscreen on. Those are healthy habits to instill early. And trust us, you and I know that they'll be thanking us later when they don't have the sun damage. But no, babies should not be tanned or burned.
All ages need sun protection. Put that shade up, keep them covered, have them under an umbrella. And I know for my kids, it's just like we go to the park, you put your hat on. They see mom put her hat on. It just becomes routine. And, I'm not getting any pushback just yet. That might be coming. But I also find that they now will put sunscreen on themselves after they brush their teeth. And in the morning, it's like their skincare routine. And they love the stick. They can put it on themselves. It's not cold, which they don't like the lotions because those are cold. And stick with, even as your kids get bigger, I still like the mineral I look for a sport sunscreen or a mineral-based sunscreen because I find when they sweat and it's hot, it doesn't tend to run in their eyes, which we all know can burn and not feel good.
Exactly. And the coverage, like with an aerosol, I tend to ask parents to stay away from an aerosol because you might not get the coverage right. And you certainly don't want to be inhaling it or getting that into your eyes. And aerosols are mostly chemical-based sunscreens. You're so right about the stick. My 10-year-old still loves a stick and they're like at the back door and he'll go and put it on before he goes out. So it's good because it gives them the independence to do it for themselves. Even if it looks streaky, doesn't really matter.
Exactly, right? It's the fact that they're doing it. And I feel like it leaves more of a white cast, but they don't seem to mind. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
Me too. I don't talk about the white, the pastiness. They're doing it themselves and it's an independent thing for them, which is great.
I tell this story sometimes. My son is so used to wearing a sun shirt, like a rash guard, that he will not swim unless he has it. Even if we're indoors, I'm like, George,
indoors, yes.
you don't have to wear that. But he's like, no, that's my swim outfit. That's what I wear.
I think that changed for me at around 11. They started not wanting to wear it as much, but they still have to, especially when the UV is the highest. I still enforce that.
Yeah.
Because they'll see us doing it too. And you've made a great point. Isn't it wonderful as parents to model for your kids what you want them to do? So you wear a hat, you get your rash guard on, they're more likely to do the same.
Absolutely. And start early, right? So it's just become part of what your family does when you go outside or you go to the beach. I cannot believe we now have tweens, but we do.
We do. I have two twins.
So that's crazy. But let's talk about, we've talked a lot about babies, but now everyone hears that teens and tweens, especially tweens, are really getting into the skincare game. And you hear about Sephora babies and all of that. So let's talk about tween and teen skincare. Are they just little adults and they can just use whatever we use, or do they need specific stuff? Is that fact or fiction?
I think this one is fact and fiction. You mentioned the Sephora baby craze. For those listeners who may not know this, there's really been a rise in especially young girls flocking to places like Sephora and Ulta Beauty, getting their hands on expensive multi-step skincare that may not really be appropriate for their skin type. And they're seeing this through social media, the kids of celebrities posting elaborate routines with very expensive products. This is the thing that we want to talk about, I think, in this myth, is that in general, a basic skincare routine is kind of the same for an adult, a teen, and a tween, right? You have a gentle cleanser, you have a moisturizer, you have a sunscreen. I think those are the very basics. But then we have stores like Sephora bursting at the seams with skincare that is made for specific concerns like aging skin, mature skin, or trying to exfoliate, etc. But truly, you have the most collagen you're ever going to have when you're a tween. There's no 12-year-old who needs a retinol. In fact, unless you have really significant acne at that age, you really don't need that at all. And then using more products has more potential for irritation and irritant dermatitis. And I see a lot of young girls, so bring in their bag, Dr. Mina, they'll have their whole bag full of things, drunk elephant, the, Bioma, all these things. And here I am paring down the skincare regimen for girls, saying, you know what? This isn't necessary. It may irritate and harm your skin barrier. And for girls with skin of color, that actually can lead to hyperpigmentation that lasts for a really long time. So a lot of times we're paring down, we're going a lot more gentle. And there's some good education about that. You don't need this because your skin does not have this concern. You don't need a harsh acid. You don't need a physical exfoliant with those little apricot beads that really damage the skin barrier. So keeping it simple, educating is really important. Kids want to have fun. As a mom, if you do get talked into heading to Sephora or Ulta Beauty, make it fun. Say yes to a sunscreen that's really cool and has fun packaging and that your child will use. Those are great habits to instill and, encourage in your kids. Have a cleanser, have a moisturizer. But do they need 50 serums from Drunk Elephant? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't need 50 serums from Drunk Elephant. and I don't have as much collagen as they do.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know what, Dr. Mina? Then we have the boys on the other side, right? So for me, I have two tween boys. I see a lot of boys in my teen and tweens in my clinical practice. And, even when they do have a skincare concern like acne and we need to address it, they seem to be less likely to go ahead and do the regimen that I'm giving them. And they don't tend to talk about their skin. And I think there's a stigma there.
Yeah.
I think there's a stigma surrounding self-care for boys. They're not in Sephora trying, 10 products from, the latest and greatest. They are less likely to engage and talk about it. And I think unless you as a mom or dad or caregiver ask, you may not know what they're doing or what they're using in the shower. If you see that your teen or tween is, needing to get into that hygiene and needing some help with that, ask the question. You might be surprised that they're using shampoo, head to toe, face, everything, everywhere, unless you ask. And I think we need to break down that stigma surrounding self-care for boys and give them the tools that they need to be successful. And that's actually where my company kind of started to try to fill a void. So I also, 4 years ago, with 3 other moms, started a company really aimed at trying to give teen boys the tools they need. And it's called Stryke Club, Stryke with a Y.
Well, I think that you bring up such a great point, right? No boy, no 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 16-year-old boy wants to go buy like a pretty pink packaging for their sunscreen or their moisturizer. Like they don't necessarily want that. They want something that speaks more to them as as young men and boys. And so there really isn't anything out there until Stryke, right, that offers that, where they can feel comfortable going in the store, picking it up off the shelf and using it and having it in their bathroom and not being, embarrassed about how it looks. So I think the marketing sometimes is swinging all towards like the young girls and young women, and there's really nothing for the boys. And I love that you bring up, ask them what they're doing in the shower or how they're washing and everything. I was surprised my son thought he had a pimple. I don't really think it was a pimple yet, but he put Vaseline on it. And I was just asking, why is your face so shiny? And he, I guess, was embarrassed or didn't want to ask me what to do. And he was putting Vaseline on. I said, well, actually, that's not really what we should be doing. Let's try this. And he was really excited to try one of those colloid patches.
Oh, I love those patches. Aren't those great?
They're amazing.
Those are a really good tool for teens.
Yeah. So he was so thrilled to be able to put that on. And I just kind of use that as an opportunity. Like, okay, you're kind of interested in skincare now. You are interested in how your face looks, your skin looks. And he's worried about acne. So you may think your kid's not worried about it, or they may not say anything to you directly, but they probably are thinking about it and wondering. And so use that as an opportunity to help educate them on what they can be doing. And I also love how you say, make it fun. If you have a daughter or a child who wants to go to Sephora, let them pick out something fun, right? We're not here to like squash all the joy in skincare, but you just don't need to spend a fortune. And there's so many products out there that you don't need, and it can actually really backfire and hurt their skin. So let them pick out like a fun moisturizer, sunscreen, or gentle cleanser.
I totally agree. Yeah. I loved what you said about having that conversation with your son and opening up the door, because, as moms, I think we're modeling it a lot for the girls, but sometimes I think that the dads aren't so much, or there's not as much discussion about that, about hygiene, about washing your underarms, about a first shave experience, so there's room for improvement. And I think you're right. If we give boys better tools that fit easily into their lifestyle and that they're able to use, you exactly hit the nail on the head, because boys do care. There's just stigma around talking about it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think actually we have 6. Do we have time for one more?
Yes, I think we do. Let's talk about it.
So when it comes to babies and children, natural skincare products are always best for the skin. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. No, this goes back to that conversation we were having about health, wellness, and beauty, how it's not regulated, how these terms like natural and botanical and things can, really indicate that there are ingredients in that product that could potentially irritate the skin. And so, we all, I think, as a dermatologist, love to use the example of poison ivy, because poison ivy is very natural, right? There's nothing more natural than a plant. But the compound in poison ivy is called urushiol. And if that oil resin gets on your skin, that's what causes that allergic contact dermatitis. And it's very miserable. If you've ever had poison ivy or poison oak, you know what I'm talking about. And so the idea that putting all of these concentrated botanical extracts, plant extracts in products without due diligence of really performing a good trial of like what is helpful to the skin. There's not rigorous testing of any of it. And so there are a couple of brands right now that are using things like mango extract in products for babies. And you might be surprised to find out that in the mango pit and peel, the same compound is present, urushiol. So we may be inadvertently sensitizing by early use of these products our children to poison ivy. So gosh, I don't want to be there when they have their first exposure to poison ivy, because they've already been sensitized. And every time you get a sensitization, you get a worse reaction. I think there's a lot of well-meaning behind this, the idea that you want to focus on things that are natural or herbal. The problem is the science doesn't back it up. And that's really where we come back to as dermatologists. Really, I think that more of us, more board-certified dermatologists need to be involved in the actual formulation, testing, and regulation of what is available over the counter. We need more representation because I believe that as a specialty, we should be the ones who are defining what is clean beauty, what is the best for your skin, because we have the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you hear like if I saw something, oh, this product has mango. I love mango. That must be amazing and so refreshing, right? But people don't realize that just because we eat it or just because it's it's a plant, right? It's naturally occurring doesn't mean there aren't side effects and that it could be potentially harmful. So yeah, I would love more transparency with this, more data, and that people don't just reflexively grab for something that, marketing says is natural, because natural doesn't always mean it's safe, doesn't always mean it's better.
Completely. I'd love to have a little bit more responsible labeling. Like, what is the intended use of the product? Who is this product for? If it is for sensitive skin, there really shouldn't be any fragrances or really irritating or allergen-provoking preservatives in the product, There should be rules about that, but there aren't.
Yeah, unfortunately not. And then, you get that rash, you get poison ivy, you don't forget it. It's pretty brutal.
No. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Dr. Maguiness, I feel like we could go on and on and on with this, but I love that we were able to cover these top 6 myths that occur, especially in pediatrics. So thank you so much for shedding light on this. And you have such an amazing social media post and education out there. Where can people find you if they want to follow you?
Thanks, Dr. Mina. It's a great conversation today. I hope your listeners can get a few little pearls of wisdom from it. I, like you, just am very committed to education. And I think it's really important that we meet our patients and their families where they are. And more these days, they're on social media. So you can find me on social media. I'm at Dr. Sheilagh on TikTok and at dr.sheilagh.m on Instagram.
Wonderful. I love that. I will include that in the show notes and also information on Stryke Club. And I will see everyone next week. Thank you.